They say after a couple decades on the job, you've seen it all. And I used to believe that, until that night. That one night I still dream about, even now, 20 years later. The kind of night that makes you question if you're really gonna make it home, if your crew's gonna make it home. My name's Jack Turner. Back then, I was station captain over at Engine 4 here in Syracuse. 18 years in the department at that point, hundreds of fires under my belt. I thought I'd seen every kind of burn this old city could throw at us. But there's something about those old wood frame apartments we used to call matchboxes, built back in the 1920s, dry as a bone inside, wiring that should have been replaced decades ago. The kind of place that just waits for a spark to go up like a torch. Anyway, this story I'm about to tell you, it stayed with me all these years. Not every fire does that. Most of the time, you finish the job, grab a cup of coffee at the house, maybe tell a story or two, and move on. But this one, sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear the wood groaning above me, that sickening snap when beams start to give way, and I remember thinking, we're not getting out of this one. Man, it still gets me. I'll be honest with you, even after all these years. And you know, if you're someone who appreciates these kinds of real stories, the ones we don't always tell around the table, go ahead and hit that like button. Maybe leave a comment. Tell me if you've ever had a moment that stuck with you like that. And if you're into hearing more of what life's really like in this line of work, hey, you're welcome to subscribe. It helps more than you know. But where was I? Yeah, that night. It was about 3:15 in the morning. One of those cold, damp Syracuse nights in late February, snow half melted into slush on the streets, a fine mist hanging in the air. The tones dropped, working fire, multi-family residents, reports of people trapped. I remember sliding down the pole, grabbing my gear, the same routine I'd done 1,000 times. You don't think, you just move. But something in the dispatcher's voice, it had an edge to it. You learn to pick up on that. When we pulled up, man, you could tell right away this was no ordinary job. That old building was already cooking flames venting out the second-story windows, thick smoke rolling into the night sky. The kind of heavy, black smoke that tells you everything inside is burning. And then the chief gets on the radio, confirmed entrapment. Family of 4, second floor. You feel that hit you in the gut. That changes everything. It's no longer about saving a structure, now it's about saving lives. And you do what you're trained to do. You go in. No questions. You grab your crew, mask up, and head straight for the heat. But this night, well, like I said, this night didn't go the way we hoped. You know, people always ask me, why'd you become a firefighter in the first place? And honestly, I didn't grow up dreaming about it. I wasn't one of those kids with a plastic helmet running around the yard. I actually worked construction when I was younger. My dad was a carpenter, so that's where I started. But after a couple years on job sites, something just didn't feel right. I guess I wanted to do something that mattered, you know? Something where, at the end of the day, you could say, we helped someone today. And back then, a buddy of mine was already on the department. Kept telling me, Jack, you gotta come test. You'd be good at this. I didn't believe him at first, but one thing led to another, and in '83, I signed up, passed the academy, and that was that. 18 years and by the time of that fire I told you about. In those years, man, they shape you. You grow close to your crew. These guys, they become like family. You trust each other with your lives. That's not just something people say, it's real. When you're crawling through pitch black smoke, can't see your own hand, you better believe you trust the guy behind you to have your back. And that trust is built on time, on going through the rough ones together. In the city. Syracuse isn't the biggest place, but it's old. The bones of this town go way back. We've got these beautiful brick streets, old row houses, industrial buildings from a different era. And with that, comes the fires that can turn ugly real fast. We've got cold winters here, those ice storms, sub-zero nights, and fires in that weather. That's a whole other thing. You're freezing. Hydrants locking up. You learn to deal with it. The pace of life on the job. Well, you never really know what's coming. You could have a quiet shift, make a couple medical runs, maybe a minor call, or you could hit the big one. And when that alarm hits at 2 a.m., jolts you out of the chair or off the bunk, your heart's racing before your boots even hit the floor. It's funny, no matter how many years you do it, that adrenaline never really fades. I always tell the young guys, if you don't feel that anymore, that little jolt, maybe it's time to hang it up. Me? I was never the loudest guy in the house. Not a big talker, but I believed in leading by example. If I asked my crew to go somewhere, you'd better believe I was going with them. You don't send your guys into a burn while you sit safe outside. Not my way. And I'll tell you, there's pride in this work. Not ego, just pride. Pride in doing it right. In being the guy others can count on. And even after thousands of shifts, there are moments that'll stay with you. Some good, some that keep you up at night. And that night I'm telling you about, that one stayed with me the longest. That morning felt like any other shift, but looking back, I know now it was far from ordinary. We just finished our 8 p.m. roll call, checked gauges, topped off air bottles, ran through our rapid intervention team drills. I was running through the checklist when I caught sight of my lieutenant, Pat O'Connor, methodically inspecting his turnout coat. Always the picture of calm professionalism. Beside him, rookie Mike Sanchez was fumbling with his SCBA straps, eyes wide but eager, the way every fresh firefighter looks when they're still wrapping their head around what real heat feels like. I clapped Mike on the shoulder and gave him that half smile I used when I wanted to say, "Trust me, you'll be fine." Even if deep down I knew sometimes things go sideways. Across the bay, in stall 3, our driver engineer, Tom Wheels Wellington, was doing a final pump check on Engine 4's rig. He and I had an unspoken rhythm. He knew every station on the map, every pothole he'd hit over the years, and I knew he'd get me where I needed to go without hesitation. Outside, the air was crisp. Late February in Syracuse means a nip that cuts through your jacket if you don't brace for it. The city was quiet. Most folks were asleep after a long week. The old brick apartments on Willow Street, built in 1925, stood silent, their facades sleeping under a light dusting of snow. To us, they were calling cards for trouble, with framing dry as kindling, wiring held together by decades of patch jobs. We'd run a few minor alarms there before, nothing major, but at 3:14 a.m., the tones dropped. Working fire, entrapment confirmed. The call came in quick flashes over the radio, courtesy of dispatch. Report of family trapped. 2 adults, 2 children. My gut clenched. Every fiber of me recognized that trigger moment. The second you hear entrapment, this job flips from property saving to life saving. I exchanged a look with Pat. No words needed, and we were on the apparatus in moments. As we pulled out, the bell clanged overhead, echoing through the empty station like a warning gong. The rest of the crew, Mike, still new but ready, Will's at the wheel, veteran Jimmy Collins manning the nozzle, fell into place behind me. The streets flew by in streaks of yellow streetlights and black pavement. Somewhere in that blur, I reminded myself, breathe, assess, lead. We rolled up to the scene to find that wood-frame matchbox already venting smoke, vivid orange tongues licking out second-story windows. Shadows danced through the brick arches as the fire's glow pulsed in the pre-dawn gloom. A neighbor flagged us down, her voice shaking. "They've got to be in there," she cried, pointing upward. That moment, the world holding its breath as you realize the stakes, hit me straight in the chest. I yanked open the door, feeling the blast of heat before I even stepped inside. Behind me, Pat and Jimmy swept in, Mike right on our tails. The stairwell was already smoldering, floorboards sagging under the blaze. I could hear muffled screams from up there, children's voices. Mike froze for a split second. I barked, "Keep moving," and he snapped back. Every instinct kicked in. Check your line, scan your surroundings, call out for victims. Heat roared in my ears like a freight train. Between breaths, I saw beams trembling overhead, the wood crackling like bone. Somewhere in the back of my mind a siren screamed, but out here, inside that inferno, all you know is your crew, your training, and the family you need to get out alive. And that, right there, that ignition of action, The moment you cross that threshold into chaos, that's where our story really begins. Everything went sideways the moment we hit that second floor landing, and I knew in my gut we were in deep water. The stairwell rumbled under our boots as Pat and Jimmy fanned out, lines charged and ready, while Mike stayed glued to my side, his eyes darting up the hall as if searching for a ghost. For a split second, everything was textbook. We'd swept the first landing, checked our gauges, and advanced with the nozzle up, water fogging the air. Then I spotted it, those fifth-floor floor joists glowing an ominous orange right above our heads, a clear sign of a hidden pocket of fire eating away at the support. My heart hammered as I barked, "Guys, look up," but before anyone could react, a thunderous crack split the air. Beams above us bowed and creaked like ancient timbers in a storm, and then the whole floor gave way under Jimmy's weight. He went down in an instant, line whipping from his hand, sparks dancing where the hose skimmed the wood. Tom slowed. My training screamed at me to keep going. Family trapped, lives on the line. But my head spun as I watched Jimmy's leg pinned under splintered deck boards, smoke billowing through the jagged hole like black water. I felt the heat surge tenfold, sweat stinging my eyes, and I realized our supply line was kinked against that debris, pressure dropping fast. "Air's at 50, Mike shouted, voice cracking. I could see Pat wrestling with the nozzle, trying to clear the kink, while Mike's mask steam-fogged. Every second counted. Upstairs, children's screams were muffled beneath the roar of the fire, a desperate reminder that we couldn't stall. But Jimmy needed help, gone silent, save for a pained groan, and if we left him, he might not make it. My mind raced. Do I peel off with Pat to free Jimmy from the collapse, or push forward into the inferno to save that family? In that moment, faced with the worst dilemma I'd ever known, my training collided with my conscience. To be honest, part of me frozen, ghosts of past calls flashing in my head, but a deeper part kicked in. A captain never abandons his crew. I yelled, "Pat, secure the line. Mike, back him out, now." I dropped to my knees, ripped away splinters, and felt Jimmy's pulse, weak, but there. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, the heat pressing in from all sides, the weight of that beam crushing his leg, and the cries from a room we couldn't see just 50 feet away. All around us, the building groaned, as if alive, threatening to collapse entirely. My mask speaker crackled. "Dispatch, we need another engine on scene. Urgent rescue, crew member down, structure unstable." But as I worked to free Jimmy, guilt clawed at me. Was I dooming that family by pausing? Up the hall, the fire was leaking closer to the stairwell. We could lose our exit path at any moment. I looked at Mike, whose face was ashen but determined, and we shared that silent understanding that this job is about choices no civilian can grasp. "Keep that line tight," I told him, voice low but firm. "I'm going up after we get Jimmy out." With a final heave, Pat and I lifted the beam enough to drag Jimmy back to the landing. His boot had a chunk missing, metal studs cutting into his leg, blood mixing with soot. I slung his arm over my shoulder and turned toward the stairwell, only to find it collapsing behind us, flames pouring from the gap like liquid fire. Man, it was crazy, every instinct screaming to bail out, but we had a family to save, a child's life dangling in the balance. In that chaos, I made a split-second call. "Mike, call medics in. Pat, give me the nozzle, I'm pushing up." And just like that, the mission split in two, one team hauling an injured brother to safety, the other plunging deeper into the unknown blaze. Anxiety, stress, pure drive took over, every breath, every heartbeat a reminder of the razor's edge we were dancing on. That turning point, the moment the plan fractured and each of us had to decide what mattered most, set off a chain reaction no training could fully prepare you for. And that's where the real fight began. I still remember the way the floor trembled beneath my boots the moment I pushed past that second landing and into the heart of that inferno. My visor was already steamed over, but I couldn't afford to pull it up. Every second counted. Ahead, the hallway was a living mural of flame and smoke, the air so hot it felt like my lungs were on fire before I even breathed. I edged forward, nozzle raised, calling out for the family, my voice swallowed by the roar. Then, through the haze, I saw her, a little girl maybe 6 years old, crouched against the far wall, clutching a stuffed rabbit so tight her knuckles were white. Her eyes were wide with terror, tears carving soot trails down her cheeks. "Hey, sweetheart," I yelled, voice breaking just enough to let her know I was human. "I've got you. It's okay. We're getting out." She didn't move at first, shock frozen in her gaze, but when I edged closer, I caught her eye and saw that spark of hope flare up. Man, it was crazy how something so small, just eye contact, could shift the whole room. I dropped to one knee, set the nozzle aside, and reached for her, but the floor above us groaned like a wounded animal. I froze, heart pounding in my throat, and then with a crack that sounded like thunder, the ceiling collapsed inches from my head, sending a shower of embers raining down. I remember thinking, this is it, this is where it ends, but the kid didn't flinch. She grabbed my arm, and somehow, I found the courage to scoop her into my gear. Her little rabbit fell behind me, lost in the ash, but she didn't let go. "Don't leave me, Captain," she whimpered, and that was all I needed. I wrapped an arm around her, kept my other hand on the wall to guide us, and called out into my radio, "This is Captain Turner, one victim secured. I need a clear path back down." My voice sounded foreign in my own ears, hoarse but determined. Behind me, I could hear Pat's voice crackling, telling Mike to bring up another line. Jimmy's rescue was still underway below us, but right then all my focus was on the child in my arms and the promise of sunlight at the bottom of those stairs. Every step felt like wading through molten lava. Each breath was a gamble with my mast air supply. At one point, a beam overhead groaned again, and I swear I felt the whole building shudder. I hunched lower, pulled the girl tighter against my chest, and whispered, "We're almost there," though I wasn't entirely sure we were. Finally, after what felt like hours but was really just seconds, I reached the landing where Pat and Mike had managed to clear enough debris to create a lifeline. I handed the girl off to Mike. He scooped her up like she was the most precious cargo on Earth, and then I slipped, momentarily losing my footing as the heat pushed me back. I slammed into the wall, gasping, and realized my left boot had caught on a splinter board. Panic surged. If I went down now, getting back up would be impossible. But right then, the girl's voice, soft but insistent, cut through the chaos. "Captain Turner?" I looked up to see her big eyes, dusted with soot, meeting mine. "Thank you." That tiny phrase was the jolt I needed. I hauled myself upright, tore my boot free with a kick, and scrambled up the final steps, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd collapse. When I burst out into the pre-dawn air, flames roared behind me through broken windows like a beast waking from slumber. Mike handed the girl to paramedics waiting with blankets, and I stood there, chest heaving as the cold air hit my sweat-drenched gear. A moment later, Pat staggered out, Jimmy draped over his shoulder, bleeding but alive. I helped guide them back, and for the first time in that night, I allowed myself to breathe. We had done it. We'd beaten the building's collapse, saved that little girl, and pulled one of our own from the jaws of disaster. But I'll never forget standing there, looking back at the inferno, feeling both invincible and utterly fragile in the same breath. That split second when I thought we were done for, that's the moment that still haunts me, the moment I'll carry with me for the rest of my days. By dawn, the chaos had settled into controlled order. We watched as paramedics wheeled that little girl away, her tear-smudged face now wrapped in a warm blanket and clutching a fresh teddy bear. I caught her mother's eye red-rimmed, exhausted, but alive, and she mouthed "thank you" in a way that pierced straight through my fatigue. Back at the scene, the rest of the crew was accounting for tools, hoses, and gear, while the battalion chief read us the all-clear. Structure unsafe, no more interior operations. We'd done our part. Jimmy was already on a stretcher, alert enough to grin and give me a thumbs up as he passed. I still get goosebumps thinking about that. His leg was broken in 2 places, but the medics assured us he'd pull through. We loaded him into the ambulance, Pat walking beside me, and I remember swallowing hard. Relief, pride, guilt all mixed together. You know, when you bring someone back from the brink, there's this weird echo in your chest that doesn't go away. Once the fire was fully under control, I climbed onto the tailboard of Engine 4 and watched as thick black smoke curled into the sky, illuminated by the rising sun. It looked almost beautiful in a terrifying kind of way. The building itself collapsed later that morning, firefighters tearing down the walls to prevent any hidden hotspots from reigniting. Downtown Syracuse would eventually clear the rubble, historians noting the old Matchbox's final chapter. For us, it was another call sign in the logbook, another story to tell on the long plate shifts. But for me, something had shifted. I remember sitting in station quarters that afternoon, gear off, boots unlaced, just staring at the wall. My hands still trembled. To be honest, it hit me then how close we'd come to losing one of our own, and how that family might not have made it out without us. Jimmy spent the next week in the hospital. I visited him on my day off, coffee in hand, and found him watching game highlights on a tiny TV. He tried to brush it off, just a scratch, Cap, he said, but when I saw the surgical scars in the black boot keeping his legs stabilized, I knew he wasn't joking. We laughed about the old days, how he used to race to the rig, how he once ran in socks because he forgot his boots. But there was a quiet moment when he met my eyes and said, "I owe you my leg, maybe my life." I patted his shoulder and replied, "We owe it to each other, every damn time." The little girl and her family were released that same week. I got a letter from her mother, a handwritten note with a Polaroid of the two kids holding up thank you signs sent to the station's mailing address. I still have it tacked to my locker. When I'm having a rough day, I look at that photo and remember why any of it matters. A couple of weeks later, we held an informal ceremony at the station. The chief pinned commendations on Jimmy and me, and the crew clapped. I hate being the center of attention, but this wasn't about me, it was about all of us, every man and woman who suits up and runs into that fire when nobody else will. We took a crew photo in front of Engine 4, faces smeared with ash and sweat, helmets in hand. That image went up on the wall, a reminder of that night and a promise that we'll always have each other's backs. Now, whenever I catch a whiff of smoke on a cold morning, I think of that little girl's eyes, wide and trusting, and I realize the weight of every decision we make. The flames taught me something I carry every day. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to act despite it. And at the end of the day, when you hang up your gear and walk out into the sunlight, you know you've done something that truly counts. I'll never forget the days that followed that fire. They felt like walking through a haze. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the ceiling collapse, heard Jimmy's groan, and felt the heat press in around us. At home, I couldn't stop replaying it, running through every decision, every shot of the radio, every second I hesitated before pulling that little girl to safety. To be honest, I've been on hundreds of calls before, but that one hit different. I found myself quieter than usual at the station, nursing my coffee in the kitchen, staring out the window when the tones dropped, wondering if today would be the day we didn't make it out. Nightmares followed me into sleep, the snap of wood, the flash of flame, and always that moment of doubt. It took a few weeks before I felt like the weight had lifted enough to breathe easy again. I started talking more openly with Pat and Mike, just little debriefs over leftovers in the back room, sharing the things I couldn't shake. It helped, realizing I wasn't alone in carrying those memories. I also noticed how I'd slowed down on scene, double-checking every step, every anchor, every exit path. Some might call it second-guessing. I call it respect for the unpredictability of fire. On my days off, I made time for my family in a way I hadn't before, playing catch with my grandson in the yard, going on long walks with my wife, just being present. That fire reminded me how fragile life is and how a single night can change everything in a heartbeat. It also deepened my gratitude for my crew. To know they'd risk everything for me, and I for them, is a bond that doesn't fade. Now, years later, I still get a knot in my stomach when I drive past that block on Willow Street, even though the building's long gone. But I also feel a sense of calm, because I know that night tested us, and we proved what it means to be a team, what it means to face fear and choose to act anyway. And that's a lesson I carry with me every time I suit up, every time I step onto that rig, and every time I pull on my helmet before walking into the unknown. I learned that courage isn't some grand, roaring feeling. It's a quiet decision you make in a split second when everything's falling apart around you. That night taught me that fear doesn't disappear just because you've worn the uniform for years. It shows up, raw and unfiltered, every time you step across that threshold into danger. But I also learned that fear isn't an enemy, you harness it. It sharpens your senses, reminds you what's at stake, and pushes you to move despite every instinct screaming to turn back. I realized that leadership isn't about barking orders or wearing a badge. It's about the willingness to carry your crew through the worst, to share their burdens, and to make the call that might save a life, even if it puts you at risk. I learned that every second matters. A hesitation can mean the difference between rescue and tragedy, and yet, sometimes the right call is about pausing long enough to see the path with clear eyes. Most of all, I came to understand that every fire leaves something inside you, an ember of memory that glows when you least expect it. Those embers can warm you, lighting the way forward with gratitude and humility, or they can burn you if you hold on to guilt. So I taught myself to let the lessons burn bright, but release the pain, to use what I've learned to prepare for the next call rather than let the past weigh me down. And that's the real takeaway. In this line of work and in life, the measure of a person isn't how they face calm waters. It's how they choose to move when the storm breaks around them. After that night, word spread through the firehouse like wildfire. Engine 4's miracle rescue, they called it, as if we'd pulled off something impossible. New recruits would poke their heads into the bay and ask Pat or Mike to tell them that story. "You gotta hear about the floor collapse," they'd say wide-eyed. It became part of our unofficial training lore, a real-world example of why checkbacks, taglines, and continuous air monitoring aren't just rules on paper, but life and death protocols. For me, though, the attention was never about the glory. I remember brushing it off over coffee in the kitchen, joking that it was just another night on the job. But inside, I carried that memory with fresh urgency. Every time the tones dropped after that, I found myself pausing a heartbeat longer to double-check my crew, to glance up at the ceiling, to feel the weight of every decision on my shoulders. And I made it my mission to pass on what I'd learned. I started running scene review drills based on that event, using the old apartment layout when we could, marking collapse zones on the board, making sure every firefighter new to the floor plan knew the risks of those vintage matchbox buildings. Outside the station, I noticed my leadership style shift, too. Less barking orders, more deliberate questions. What's our exit if that hall goes? Or where's your team tagline right now? I wanted every man and woman in my crew to internalize that momentary hesitation could be the thing that saves them. Over the next several years, I never faced a floor cave-in quite like that one, but I did find myself instinctively reaching for that memory whenever I sensed a building settling under the heat. And when I finally moved out of the captain's seat and into a training officer role, that story became the centerpiece of my lessons, a visceral way to teach the value of respect for fire's unpredictability. In retirement, I still get calls from old colleagues asking, "Hey, Captain Turner, you got time to come tell your firehouse about that collapse?" And I go, because every time I stand in front of a new class of firefighters and recount that night, I see the same spark in their eyes, an understanding that this work demands more than courage. It demands humility, awareness, and the willingness to learn from every ember of the past so they can face the next call with clear eyes and steady hands. You've stuck with me through the smoke, the crack of collapsing beams, and the moments that define who we are when everything's on the line. Now, I want you to carry one thought with you. Fear isn't a weakness. It's the signal that you're alive, that there's something worth protecting on the other side of that door. In my years as a fire captain, I've learned that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about feeling that pulse in your chest and choosing to move forward anyway. It's about knowing that every decision you make, every split-second hesitation or surge of instinct can mean life or death, not just for you, but for someone who's counting on you. So before you hit like or scroll on by, ask yourself this: when your own moment of truth comes, when you're standing at the threshold of your own fire, will you step into the unknown, or will you let fear write your story? And if you were in my boots that night, would you have found the strength to lift that beam, to reach for that child, to face down the flames? I'm betting more of you might surprise yourselves than you think, but I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know, what would your story be in those final seconds before you chose to act?